By now, we know that the majority of us are living longer than any prior generation, which is good news. But it also means we will likely need help as we age. So, how many of you have had that conversation? Parents, have you talked to your adult children? Adult kids, have you talked to your parents about what they would like when they need help? I'm guessing no. If there's one big roadblock I've run into in my 18 years of working with older adults, it's that few people are having the conversation with their family. Does this sound familiar to you? Are you struggling with how to approach your adult children or how to bring up the topic with your parents? Then this episode is for you. Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Let's get smarter about growing older. Welcome to Seniority Authority. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. My guest today is Kate DeBartolo, who is Senior Director at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, IHI. She leads the Conversation Project, their public engagement initiative to help people share their wishes for care through the end of life. The Conversation Project was founded in 2010 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Ellen Goodman, based on her belief that these discussions should begin at the kitchen table, not in the intensive care unit. The Conversation Project has free tools, guidance, and resources to start those discussions with your family. Kate has been with IHI since 2007, designing and executing national field operations for IHI's hospital-based program. A graduate of Wellesley College, she has a background as a grant analyst and currently lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and son. Welcome to Seniority Authority, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm thrilled you can be here because this is a big topic. I mean, big. Many people may have not heard of the Conversation Project, even though it's been around for 15 years. Can you tell us a little bit about how it started?
Sure. So you were describing Ellen Goodman, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist from the Boston Globe, who helped start this, really based on the story of the experience she had in caring for her mom through the end of her life and realizing that she had not talked to her mom about the wishes she would want. She felt like there were a cascading number of questions coming her way from the healthcare team and that it just didn't sit very well with her. And pulled together a dinner with friends and colleagues and talked to a bunch of people who'd gone through similar experiences. But a common denominator seemed to be that those who'd had a harder time had not talked about this with the person in their life. And those who had a quote unquote good death, and I use quotes there because I don't want to pass judgment on the grief somebody may have about the loss of someone, but how complex or complicated that grief was really seemed to depend on whether people had talked about this, if they felt prepared to speak on behalf of someone. So she brought the idea to IHI, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, who said, we love this, come on in, we'll help house this initiative. You can use our staff, our resources. And what started as kind of one conversation starter guide and a small website and trying to get the word out through traditional media very quickly grew into much larger community groups saying, can I bring this to my community? Can you help me create additional guides or additional language resources and work with congregations? And we've tried to bring this to people where they live, work, pray, and learn. And it's been a fun project.
That's awesome. And it's not surprising to me. Ellen is such a great journalist, and I can see that having had this personal experience, she wanted to fix it for other people. We know that there have been studies on Americans who would like to have this conversation. Overwhelmingly large percent say, yes, I'd like to have this conversation, but a smaller percentage have actually done it. Can you, Kate, give us some sociological perspective on why this conversation is so challenging to have?
Yeah. I think there's sometimes that people think this is something, oh, I got to wait and do it with an attorney, or I've got to wait for the doctor to bring it up. It's very medical or legal, which is not, that's one thing we're trying to move away from. And that it may be on somebody's list of things to do, but it's never at the top of the list. It feels like, oh, I've got time to get to that. I've got more pressing issues happening this weekend and I'll deal with it later. But also that people are worried about upsetting each other. We've learned that sometimes the parent wants to bring it up with their adult child, but doesn't want to upset the child. And then the child wants to bring it up with their parent, but doesn't want to upset the parent. And so everybody's being a little too nice about this when really we know a lot of people know that this is something they should do. They are open to it. They would feel relief if they had these conversations. So that's where we're trying to not only have tools available for people when they're ready to do it, but also to try to change the cultural norms that this is just something we all do as part of our adult life. I would also add one thing there, which is that science and medicine and technology have gotten more advanced in the last few decades. We didn't used to have as much of a say in the type of care that we would want. And it's more kind of modern medicine that has allowed for more decisions to be made. And so I think that there were generations that were much more comfortable with these topics, multi-generations living in the same home, experiencing the death of people in your life. And we kind of moved away from that for a little bit. And now it is coming back for people to say, hang on, this is not just a medical experience. This is a human experience. I want to have a say.
That's absolutely true. And we have more choices as we live longer. And as you pointed out, there's improved technology. We have different choices as to what we can do, we can have these conversations. What would you suggest to our listeners about the best way to approach the conversation?
So I can imagine there's some listeners who are thinking, how do I bring up what my wishes are with someone? And others who are thinking, how do I ask somebody about their wishes? So
Exactly.
I'm going to talk kind of about both. And I think regardless of who you're trying to bring this up with, thinking about how the person you want to talk with is going to best receive this topic, how to make them feel comfortable and not just doing it the way you want to bring it up. And I think of a woman I met in Akron, Ohio, who said she hosted Thanksgiving every year. She always made the desserts and she held them all hostage and said, no pumpkin pie till you tell me how you want to die, and made everybody go around the table. And on the spot, you had to answer the question and talk about it in front of the whole family. That worked for her culture or her family. That would not work for some other people. Some people, that might be wildly inappropriate, or somebody would want an email heads up, or, I'm going to be visiting next weekend and I want to be sure that we talk about this. So really thinking about how does the person I want to talk with, how are they going to receive this topic best? It can be helpful to think about current events or favorite TV shows or other things that are happening. I was thinking about what happened with Aunt Susie. It made me realize I'm not so sure what you would want in that situation, and to really walk the walk. If you're going to be asking somebody about their own wishes, do this yourself. This is applicable to anybody over 18. And so to not have it be implied like, I'm just worried about you, Mom, but we're all doing this, can be really helpful.
I love that tip, because I think that people can feel a little infantilized if it's like, well, I'm going to help you. What do you want? Because I am not going to need the help, or I'm not going to need to know what to do when I pass away. We all are going to need help. We all are going to pass away. So what's the choice? I also like the fact that you brought up, and I found this to be true in my life, that there are people who are processors where you have to give them a heads up. I'd like to talk about this. Here's what I'd like our conversation to include. How about next Tuesday? Versus other people who can respond on the fly, and realizing this is a sensitive topic, probably more of a heads up.
And there's some people who, like, it's helpful to kind of unpack what is it that they're anxious about talking. There was a woman who I was talking to whose mom really kept avoiding this every visit. And she finally said, Mom, we've got to talk about this. I really want to be sure I can honor and respect what you want. You're living alone and we need a plan. And she said, okay, well, the next time I come, let's go to a park and talk about it. Because what was really worrying to her is she didn't want to cry in front of the grandkids. So it was more of like, let's go somewhere. Whether the kids can't see me, then I'm willing to talk about it. She just never wanted to do it in the home. And so for some people, what they're concerned about, you may think they don't want to talk about this topic, but really they're worried about the dynamics of physically where you might be doing it. So really thinking about what would this person need to feel most comfortable.
That's a great point. I didn't even think about that, but where and when and what is bothering them about
Yeah.
it. That's awesome. What other elements are important to keep in mind when having these conversations?
I would encourage everybody, if you're doing this, even if you think you already did this and you've got some document filled out, to give current answers. People will say, well, I don't know if I'm going to be in a car accident or if I'm going to get cancer. And there's no way to discuss every hypothetical medical scenario that could play out.
Mhm.
But what would you want if something unexpected happened to you today? That's the conversation you should be having, especially if you're in good health at the moment. You can update the conversation, bring it up regularly. We have National Healthcare Decisions Day every year. You can revisit this every April. So giving current answers about what your values are, not, again, just feeding tubes and CPR. A colleague who said with her husband, she said, as long as I can emotionally and socially parent our children, I'm in. That was her one sentence. They had
Wow.
teenagers. If I can know what's going on in their life, if I can help them deal with their social issues or talk about their homework, I'm willing to go through any physical limitations. I would want you to do everything you can. But if the prognosis is such that I couldn't communicate with them in that way, I don't need you to take extreme measures. Her husband can make almost every single decision off of that one sentence. And that's what we're trying to get people to elicit. Like, what would you want right now if you couldn't speak for yourself? And to also acknowledge that sometimes these aren't end of life conversations. You might actually be okay. You might need a little treatment or something. There's an accident, and in a couple of months, you'll be in good shape. But there was a moment where you couldn't speak for yourself. What do you want that person to know? I think it's important to also pick somebody who can honor your wishes. You don't have to pick your spouse or the oldest adult child, especially if they don't agree with what your wishes are. So making sure people have chosen somebody that can honor that it's important to tell more than one person. I know my mom was one of 7. She was the decision maker for her parents, but the other siblings knew what was going on. They weren't surprised by anything. There's a woman I met in Florida who said she was her husband's healthcare proxy. They'd had all the conversations. She felt prepared, but she was his second wife and he had 2 adult children and he hadn't told them that he chose her as the decision maker. And he doesn't need to go into all the details, but he can just send an email. Hey kids, heads up. Barbara and I were doing this, wanting you to know she's the healthcare decision maker. So just being sure that you're kind of letting other people be in the loop, I think can make a big difference.
It's an important point that you brought up, Kate. And how important is it to write things down?
I think it can be very important. I don't want to claim that medical and legal documentation is not valuable, because it certainly is. It just doesn't do us much good if something is sitting in a filing cabinet or a safety deposit box that nobody knows about. So having it written down and saying, okay, I worked on these documents. Let me go over them with you. Here's where they are. Here's an email so that you can pull it up if you need to. I think that that's an important piece for anybody who is a solo ager, which is a really fast growing population, and maybe doesn't feel like there's an automatic decision maker. All the more reason to be sure that your doctors have this on file, that there's legal documentation. If there's somebody that you really do not want involved in your care, we see this sometimes in the LGBTQ plus community or other groups where maybe a family of origin is not the most supportive. And here's somebody I do not want involved. That's important to get that in writing and be sure people know. So I see this as kind of a companion to the written word, but that it's not good. I remember somebody saying, oh yeah, I had shoulder surgery 13 years ago. I filled out some form. I'm sure my doctors still have it on file. That's where I get nervous. Like, I bet they don't still have it on file. I bet your wishes might have changed since then. So we're just trying to encourage, talking about this more.
Well, people say, I don't want to talk about it. And my response is, don't you want a voice in what happens?
For sure.
And if you want a voice, you have to speak up. You have to talk about things, because otherwise people don't assume. I'm one of 5 adult children, and before we had this conversation with my parents, we all had a different point of view as to what they would want. And my dad at one point went in for back surgery and he said, okay, if I come out in a wheelchair, that's it, pull the plug. And we said, it doesn't quite work like that.
True. People often will say that if I ever get like that, pull the plug or give me the whole enchilada. There's not even a plug to pull.
Yeah.
And so to say, okay, well, let's unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. And then when he was 89 and 88, he was very happy to be in a wheelchair. I mean, not happy, but he had some great years. So I think what you're saying is what your thoughts are now, and it is going to change as you live more and have more experiences. Your vision of what you would like your last years to look like is going to look different.
One comment that you made of, having a say in your care, which is so true. You've made all these other major decisions in your life. Why would we be leaving this one up to chance? The one thing I would say is the concept of autonomy is varied. There are some people who are like, here is the 20-point bullet list of exactly what I want you to do, no matter what, follow this exactly. And then I remember meeting with a woman in Las Vegas who looked through our materials and said, I don't actually care that much. I just want my kids to do whatever makes them feel comfortable when the time comes. But that's the conversation she should have with her kids, rather than them saying, I don't know, mom never told us. It's, hey, I want the two of you to be on the same page. I don't have very strong preferences one way or the other. So even if and there's different cultural dynamics with different families. So is it a family decision? Is it one person's decision? There's so many ways this could go, but that's still what we want to kind of pull out and have people discuss.
No, that's true. And I think people also think about this as end of life, but it really is the rest of your life when you are going to need help. We are all going to live longer with more comorbidities, more complex diseases, and that means you may need help at some point, and people are reluctant to ask for help, but you have to be clear. If you're expecting your children are going to be the one to drop what they're doing, come and care for you, you should have that conversation. Yeah. If you are going to stay at home and bring in care, you should look at the prices of care, have the conversation. So I think this is just opening the door to a lot of good conversation about different scenarios.
Yeah.
Do you have some examples of what never to do during these conversations?
It's hard to be absolute, but I think it's important to not push your own wishes on someone else when they're trying to tell you something. I remember being at an event in Florida. There may be 250 people in the room. Somebody got up in tears and just said, I realize I owe my father a huge apology because he's really sick right now, and listed off his health issues, and his breathing got bad last night and he wouldn't go to the hospital. And my siblings and I were laying it on so thick. We were calling him, texting him, sending videos of the grandkids saying, I need you, Papa. And I realized like he is trying to tell us something of what he's willing to go through next. And we have not been listening. And so if your input is requested, that's one thing. But if somebody's really trying to tell you that they want something that might be different than what you would want for yourself or what you would want for them, being thoughtful of that. It goes back to that idea that it doesn't always have to be the spouse or the oldest child who is willing to listen to what your wishes are, or for you to be able to say, like, I'm so grateful you asked me and I can't honor that. Like I wouldn't feel comfortable in the moment doing that. We often will hear from people the desire to be at home. And that can be a tricky one to unpack for people. A similar story of a woman crying and saying, my grandmother's only wish was to die at home and we couldn't do it. Her dementia got so hard to manage. Maybe it's medically, financially, physically. We're a fifth floor walk up. Somebody wants to go back to a home country that maybe they can or can't go. But like, what is it about home that's important? And I know for my grandmother, it was having her cat with her. She was willing to go anywhere if the cat could be there. But for others, it might be a private room or home cooked meals or artwork on the walls or family that's visiting. So not to just blanketly say, like, we can't do that, or I promise we'll do that, without understanding what is it behind that would help you honor those wishes. Because again, we can't talk about every hypothetical that will happen, but we can try to be prepared to understand the values behind what's important to someone.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is very hard with folks that have dementia in the advanced stages when they are trying to escape or trying to get out of the house. That can be very hard to keep them there. It's not necessarily the best. But
Yeah.
I think everyone has had an experience of talking to an older adult who trying to open up the conversation and they shut it down by saying, I don't want to talk about it. What is your advice to how to successfully reopen that conversation?
There's one thing that you said earlier that I think is important framing. If this is much more about like how you want to live your life through the end. So even the opening or the language you would use to introduce the concept. And, I want to be sure if there's ever a time where you couldn't speak, like, what do you want me to know? And not an emphasis on death and dying. This is about how you want to live your life through the end. It goes back to making sure the person feels physically, emotionally comfortable. The focus on what's most important in life right now, maybe not about future medical scenarios, but can you talk to me about what's important to you now? We have a lot of questions in our guides. Are you concerned about too much care, too little care? Do you want people to do exactly what you say or not? Maybe go through and pick the one question that's most important to you, not to see this as a big sit down conversation, but if you could get one or two questions answered, really be like prioritizing that, because the person, I don't want to talk about it right now, or I don't have time to do this whole thing, but is it that you could confirm, like, I got it, but is it right to assume you want me to be the decision maker? Even just getting to that. But there was a woman who referred to her husband as Eeyore because he was very gloomy. He never wanted to talk about it. So she reframed things as yes, no questions. Is it right to assume that you want me to be the decision maker? Yes. Great. That was helpful. She can work on that. Okay, here's what I think you would want if you couldn't speak. Is that right? He's like, yeah, but here's one other thing I would change. So for some people, that's going to be a much easier piece. Again, the current events, Jimmy Carter, or hearing about different people, either in favorite TV shows, movies, stories from the past, that can be helpful. And just kind of keeping an open mind, being willing to talk more than once. I think sounds like you don't want to talk about this right now. I'm going to respect that. But most of all, I just want you to know that I'm here for you. And I want to be sure your wishes are honored. If you're up for it another time, I'm really eager to understand that. You could send me an email later if you want. You pick somebody else to talk to. Bring a note to talk about to your doctor. Like this, we joke that it's conversations. We should have been the Conversations Project. But for some people, it's going to be easier to say, I'm putting a couple of thoughts in an email. That's it. I can't talk to you face to face. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I want something that you could reference, or I'll write you a note and I'm going to leave it in the top drawer of my folder. But helping people realize, like, we can talk about this another time. I'm just here really to respect and honor what you want, I think can go much better than we really need to talk about how you want to die. That's not really an opening that most people are eager for.
No. But I want to learn about your thoughts.
Yeah.
As you get older and may need more care, or we may have to make plans.
Yeah.
What do you want? And I love that. Yes, no. I think that's great, especially for people who are not comfortable with these emotional conversations. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about the Conversation Project is you have so many tools on your website, so many conversation starters, questions. So a lot of people come to me and, well, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do it. You don't have to figure it out. Conversation Project has done all of that. You have templates on how to do this. And you can start it even earlier because, as you and I were talking, you authored a tool called My Health Checklist, which I think every single person listening to this podcast right now could benefit from. I thought it was terrific. And that's a free resource to help everyone get more out of their annual appointment with their physician. Can you discuss what inspired that, creating that tool?
Yeah. So this is, as you described, a good tool to help people prepare for medical appointments. I'm housed at IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. We've got a big initiative with a lot of different groups called Age-Friendly Health Systems. And a lot of care is organized around 4 M's: what matters, medication, mind, and mobility. Kind of regardless of somebody's health status, these 4 M's really capture the key areas of health for most older adults. And so we wanted to help providers, medical team understand what's going on for you, what's going well, what could be better, what questions you have. So we created this guide where each of these can influence others. So for example, a new medication might be causing dizziness, which influences mobility. your confidence exercising, how do you bring it up? And instead of remembering something on your way out the door,
Yes.
it's a short guide to kind of think through and organize your thoughts to identify the top 1 to 3 things that you really want to talk about in an appointment. It could apply to any specialty, but it's kind of going through these 4 M's so that you can be prepared for those appointments. And the healthcare team really appreciates, they want to know what matters most to you. What's on your mind? How can I help you? Based on what's going on in your life, they can make a variety of medical recommendations. And if they're guessing what you want to focus on, that's not as helpful.
Well, I think that's terrific because this has been one of my goals for a long time. I did a podcast, I think a year and a half ago with a physician. And my point was, how can you get the most out of this? You get one appointment per year where you're going to have this time. And I always write things down because I don't want to forget anything. But I love the idea of taking 10 minutes ahead of time and going through this checklist and saying, okay, so you're prepared, you know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
And especially it goes with every specialist.
Yeah. I agree. And so that's free. It's in multiple languages. All of our tools are free. I should have clarified that from the beginning, and hopefully it's helpful. You can access it on the Conversation Project website as well.
Okay.
So yeah, theconversationproject.org.
.org, and that will be in our show notes along with IHI. So the Conversation Project has been around for 15 years. What's the result of all this time and effort working on encouraging people to have conversations? How do you measure your impact?
I know it's been a tricky one. It's such a fun project to work on, but it's hard for us to say, did somebody who listened to this podcast go home and have the conversation? There's no way for us to know that. We don't know what's going on back at home with people, but from national news stories to individuals reaching out to us to tell us about how they've used the materials, we've kind of set up our own measurement system to try to capture the episodes of exposure to this concept. We know that we've reached millions of people. And what's exciting, especially with different language translations, is that we're now reaching into new countries and groups that are taking this concept and applying it in their local context as well. So that's been a really exciting thing for us.
Oh, that's awesome. And you are, very young, have a husband and a child. How has working at the Conversation Project shifted your thoughts and your own approach to aging?
I think that I am more proactive about my own health and kind of helping manage that and talking about with the older adults in my life, whether I've got a big family on both sides and in-laws, and I'm the person that people will come to ask questions about this. It's clear to me that this is really about living your best life through the end. And so I don't associate this with death and dying. I think about this of your values, and we know that conversations clarify. You can have a say in your care, and that's true at every stage of life, and especially as we get older or as we think about some of these decisions that could be made.
Awesome. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with our audience as we wrap this up?
I guess I mostly just don't want people to wait. It always seems too soon until it's too late. And this does not have to be a big production. It is something that you could get started. I don't know what day you're going to be listening, but you could get this done by Tuesday. It's a big emotional weight off your shoulders. So taking a peek at the resources, sending a message to somebody saying, hey, heard about this. I'd love to talk to you about it this weekend. Just seeing it as smaller bite-sized pieces and not a huge administrative task that needs to be done or something that's very expensive, I think is the key thing that I want to convey, and that we're always eager to hear feedback that people have. All of these additional tools that we've created for caregivers of somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia, or how do you talk to a doctor, or what about living with serious illness? Those were all based on people reaching out to us to say, hey, we've got an idea of something you could add, or here's a language that would be helpful. So let's say you have the conversation, it goes well, then thinking, who else can you share this concept with? We talked earlier about reaching people where they live, work, learn, pray. It might be helpful to have a celebrity do this, but you have a sphere of influence. The people listening right now, you've got people in your life that you could help normalize this for. And so to really just kind of take that forward and be the person who passes that message on would be wonderful.
I love that. I love that. So, listeners, do me a favor, share this podcast with someone you'd like to have the conversation with, and send us a note and tell us how it went, and we'll pass that on to Kate. Definitely check out the Conversation Project. Kate, it has been such a delight to have you to talk about this really important topic. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much. You can see it's fun. It's not all tears and doom and gloom. Like, it's a great topic.
This is good. That's our show for today. If you enjoyed it, give us a like on Instagram or Facebook, and please tell a friend so we can get more people to get smarter about growing older. Go have those conversations. See you next time. That's our show for today. If you liked it, please tell your friends so we can reach more minds and keep the conversation going. Or follow us on social at Seniority Authority. I'm Kathleen Toomey. Until next time, enjoy your chance to get smarter about growing older.